I'd like to hand you over to Ryan McConechy, who's the CTO at Barrier. And as I say, there'll be 5-10 minutes for questions at the end. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. As introduced, I am Ryan McConechy, CTO at Barrier Networks. Been in IT for about 18 years, 16 years of that in networking, 10 years of that in cybersecurity. At Barrier, I oversee the professional services and managed services teams, working quite closely as a trusted partner in security for our clients. We also have a kind of prime focus in OT and converged national infrastructure. Going to dive straight into this, talking about zero trust network architecture. So, what is it? I'm going to go with a wee definition to start with. This is from Gartner. It's kind of long-winded. I'm going to just say nope. It's being a bit too prescriptive, and it's talking about network access. We've moved on. We're talking about architecture now. This I prefer. Shorter, succinct. It's not trying to describe it all in intense detail. It's an overview. Oh, sorry, clicked too quickly. Excuse me, sorry. Not used to the clicker. So, what is it from parallels? How can we liken this to things that you already know? We've got some common building blocks you might already be familiar with, but they've been reimagined in zero trust, they've been reused. Principle of least privilege. This is a paradigm that kind of underlies zero trust. We are locking it right down to just what's needed. We're being very specific. This is what we should have been doing for years, but in zero trust, this is what you have to do to be zero trust. Network access control, NAC. Show of hands for people who are familiar with NAC or know what NAC is. I'm showing my hand, obviously. I know what I'm doing. We're going to be using NAC as part of zero trust. Zero trust relies on NAC, but we've dialed it up. It's NAC on crack. We are doing more with NAC. It's not just let them on and forget about them. We'll get a bit more into detail about what NAC's doing for us. And then this one, chains of trust. You'll probably be thinking of certificates. Yes, certificates. We're going to be using those. It's a very good indicator for where the device is from, what level of trust we give it, and that it could be trusted. So what is it? I'm going to give some examples of where zero trust comes in. I'm not going to define what zero trust is happening for these, just this is where zero trust will be applied. So we've got the classic company laptop connecting to the network. How do we do that? This is a device we've probably got a good deal of control over, and we want to be very sure because we'll be giving it access to important assets. Remote access to on-prem, off-prem cloud. This is wide open. This covers a lot of use cases, but zero trust is going to have to apply here. Your mind's swimming with all the things that fit into that one. How is zero trust going to come in here? For our industrial friends, we've got PLC connecting to OT Zone 2, referencing the Purdue model. Zero trust comes into OT as well. We're not just doing this in the IT network. Where we have IP addresses, zero trust's coming in. Print on the company LAN, like the first example, but different. We don't trust the printer as much as we might trust a laptop, but we need to make sure it gets what it needs, nothing more. And this is maybe coming at you kind of, why would I want to authenticate a network switch? Well, how can you trust you're giving access unless you trust the point of enforcement that gives the access? What's to stop someone bringing in their own kit from home? You don't want to trust that. So you have to authenticate your network as well as the endpoints that attach. And don't forget about cloud. Cloud's there too. Zero trust is going to fit into cloud. This is complicated because your cloud workloads are going to be multiple different containers, native constructs within cloud, VMs, all sorts of things. They're going to be pulling in data from all over the place, and you need to think about zero trust and how you make sure that these components talk to each other and nothing more. So why do we want to do it? Why do we bother? Well, when the worst happens, notice we're all saying when, we stopped saying if a long time ago. The news has told us that much. When the worst happens, if you've done zero trust, you don't look the fool, or as much the fool when you stand up in front of the news and say, something happened, we're currently investigating, blah, 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 blah. You can be more specific when it happens because zero trust gives you more detail about when, and you contain it much better. You want to save time later. Is it easier to slowly plan your deployment to zero trust, start rolling that out? Or do you want to rebuild your infrastructure in a day because you've been breached and the entire network's gone south? Now, compliance, there's probably not a compliance framework out there that's going to say, you must have zero trust, because zero trust isn't a thing. It's a many things of things. It's a paradigm, it's a methodology, it's a mantra, whatever you want to call it, but it's made up of security components. And that's what compliance wants to see. If you're doing zero trust, there's a good chance there's lots of bits of zero trust you can point to and say, we are meeting compliance here. And then the scales, they tip. Would you rather budget ahead and implement zero trust on your time scales, or just pop a load of money now in the bank for your ransomware payment? Good chance ransomware is going to cost you a lot more than implementing this over a nice planned rollout. What are the payoffs? Well, with zero trust, you are containing the blast radius. If someone gets in, they then have to work very hard to start moving around laterally because you've given them the least possible avenues to move around. They're still going to get in. We're still talking when, but you might dissuade them. You might make the job so hard they think it's not worth it, or at the very least you slow them down. And the zero trust implementation, you're going to have visibility and know when they're in and shut them out sooner. User experience. Zero trust lends itself to moving away from your remote access VPN, things like that, and also leveraging modern security mechanisms, simple MFAs. Your user experience is going to be easier because users hate security. It gets in the way of doing their job. Detection and response. Zero trust prevents, zero trust monitors, zero trust gives visibility and observability. You will know sooner that something has happened and you will respond quicker. You will respond more effectively because you will have the tooling. It won't be we spotted something in the logs. It could have been going on for months. We've shut it off now. We had to log onto 18 servers and do this, that, the next thing. If you're looking at cyber insurance, like compliance, I don't think insurers are definitely going to start saying, you must have zero trust. But again, the mechanisms you deploy, it's probably going to please your insurers, allow you to get a policy, maybe reduce premiums. Cost savings. Yep, you're going to save money by spending money. No, really. No, really. You will have the infrastructure at your fingertips to operate your security with not lower headcount, but the same headcount as before. You're not going to have to go and get more people in to run the system. You've got powerful tools. People can do more with less. And data protection, beyond the obvious of stopping people getting in and getting to your stuff. This is maybe talking a bit about future. Right now, we can do tagging of security in the network, like we do tagging of VLANs or tagging of voice packets to give them priority. The future is that, could be, I don't want to say it is, could be that we start classifying data in the traffic flows, and as a result, we can do DLP-like mechanisms. That's maybe a bit predictive. I'll try and keep the future gazing down to a minimum, but that could be something that's coming. Zero trust is still an evolving space, a lot of innovation happening there. So How do we do it? Start with strategy. If you don't know what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, you're never going to get there. Zero Trust is a combination of products. You are going to struggle to get these deployed if you don't know what your end goal looks like. So define your strategy, work out what you want to be doing, and I would probably say something like 3 to 5 years. Any further and you run the risk of having a strategy that's incompatible with innovations that come out in the space. It's not a new term, but it's still very new to some of us. Once you've got your strategy, get your budget. Won't hover here too long, because if you set the strategy, you probably don't set the budget. Strategy and budget in hand, you can then plan. You can pick your bill of materials, you can decide where Zero Trust is going to apply in your infrastructure, and it'll be different from every one of us here, because you could be heavily cloud focused or you could be very traditional on-prem. How you do it, and that's where you plan. You get all your ducks in a row. Where is BOM? Sorry, I'm not going to be doing a bill of material for you today. No dice. But this is to help you think about your own, because it's so different for everyone here. So a couple of things you might want to ask yourself at the planning phase. Where's my network perimeter? If you're lucky enough to still have one. It might be that you consider it to be, I've got a nice big toasted sandwich here with a big crust around the outside, easy, easy peasy. Or you could be looking at a bubble bath, and 10% of those bubbles are yours, and 90% are not. What do you need to access remotely? Zero Trust really comes in and helps with the remote access piece. The way we do it varies quite significantly. I'll talk a bit more in detail about that soon. And then how do my systems interact? Because Zero Trust applies in the conduits between all these different systems, apps, containers, blah, blah. At the planning phase, you're going to want to consider the components of Zero Trust. These are the main building blocks that make up the solution. First of all, we need a brain. That brain could be a single app, could be multiple apps, servers, but some form of policy engine. And a lot of people are probably thinking about NAC right now. Yep, you're probably in the right space there, but the NAC engine is going to be working harder. It's going to be doing more. This is the point which takes in all the data of what's happening, all the different access requests, factors, get into the factors, and it makes decisions. It imposes policy. It is your point of visibility and management. As I said, could be many components within the brain. Got agents. Maybe an optional component depending on what you're doing, but these go on the endpoint. These control what the endpoint is doing. They provide greater visibility, and they can dovetail nicely into providing the Zero Trust at the edge. Infrastructure, both cloud and on-premise. This is your point of enforcement. This is where the decisions have impact. This is where you interact with the devices, clients, workloads, and determine what access they get. This is also where you might perform tagging for their traffic to be marked as it moves throughout your infrastructure. Observability. Now this is probably the most important one as far as I'm concerned, because Zero Trust is all very well and good. I've created my policy. I say this can do that, that can't do this. But how do I know, A, I've got my policy right, B, that policy is being enforced? Observability will tell me something needs to watch and make sure that I've done my job right, because people make mistakes. Zero Trust is part of an orchestration, hopefully reduce those mistakes, but a mistake made at that level can be propagated widely. The other part in observability is actually watching what's going on in the network. I've told my printer it can only talk to the print server. If it suddenly wants to start talking to my domain controllers on NetBIOS, maybe I don't want that. So something to say, Mr. Operator, we've observed anomalous material. Something that's got the intelligence to say, we've seen enough strange behavior that we want to flag this endpoint, this this workload as being out of compliance or compromised even. And a bit of a catch-all here at the end, kind of APIs. We can't forget the APIs running between our systems. We need to make sure they're secure. Also, your zero-touch system is going to have its own APIs. They will feed into other systems as part of your overall infrastructure to orchestrate security around your workloads, because your infrastructure is not static, changes all the time, and you want to be agile. So APIs are a key component to that. A couple of factors within zero trust that we want to consider for our decision-making process. Got direct factors, and these are things that we can fingerprint off the device that will inform the decision. MAC addresses, generally pretty hard to get access to the network without one, but can be easily spoofed. Anyone here spoofed a MAC address? A few hands, so yeah, very easy. Not a lot of confidence in that mechanism. We need to make sure that we treat it thus. It might be the only thing we can make a decision on, so we make sure that we lock those devices right down. Endpoint agents, they're going to come in and give us a lot more context about an endpoint, and that's going to allow quite a thorough decision to be made. Certificates, mentioned that earlier. High confidence in certificates, not foolproof, but your PKI infrastructure is important. Active authentication, yep, usernames, passwords, don't forget MFA. And then we've got profiling, where we are actively scanning devices on the network to see that they remain the same, see that they don't have open ports. And finally, traffic analysis. As I was saying, we are looking for anomalous behaviors, we are looking for strangeness, things that haven't happened before, and enough of those come together to indicate this endpoint is out of compliance. And the passive factors. Location, where is the device? We want to treat it differently if it's in China versus if it's on the company network in the main office. Trajectory, if it's in the main office, why is it logging in from China an hour later? We've got a potential impossible journey there we need to worry about. All this intelligence is baked into the system. We're not expecting an operator to be watching all this and making decisions. The brain takes the data and translates it into actionable intelligence. Time of day, should someone be in the office at 3 a.m.? Depends on how you do, but something to consider. Zone is a more granular version of location where you might have high classification areas that you need to consider. And interaction. This device has talked to this device for the first time. Do we want to concern ourselves with that behavior? Going back to OT for a second, the industrial sector, does it differ? Yes and no. There's maybe some different terms in here. There's definitely a few extra protocols, DNP, Modbus. We still, anything that's TCP IP, we want to be watching that. We want to be bringing zero trust to that. Might be less concerned about the protocols running over the wires at the very bottom layers, but why should we treat that any differently? Certain solutions may be available in purely for industrial that read these protocols, but there are some that are more general that work across both IT and OT spheres. OT will be a little bit slower to get your deployment out. New technology coming along, there can be concerns about that, can affect production, can affect safety. We want to make sure that we deploy that in a safe manner. May move slower, obviously. Outage windows, smaller windows, less of them, but still plodding forward. And that's where observability is really important. You can typically bring observability into any network without causing any real impact, and you can get some real intelligence from that. You can establish your network baseline. So what are the reasons to really start your zero-touch push, zero trust push, all the acronyms? So you get the confidence in your security by going beyond the traditional methods. You are really screwing things right down to make sure that, it's a dream. To make sure it's like, I know my endpoints can't talk to other things they don't need to talk to, because why should they? That's great. It's what we should have been doing 10 years ago, but everyone's busy. But now the tooling is coming forward to make our jobs a lot better. We're going so much deeper into it as well. We are not just going, right, I've made sure this client can't talk to anything else. We are looking at what it's doing all the time to make sure that it's connecting to the right things and not the wrong things. And we are repeatedly checking this. We don't just check them when they come in, we check them all the time. We might be looking at doing it not necessarily on a device level, we might be doing it on a flow level or a process level. We, can be zero trusting everything. And we've got the tools to respond very quickly. Knowing something's going wrong and acting within minutes, hours, even automatic remediations can be put in where if something triggers enough thresholds, it just gets shut out or locked right down to the absolute minimum. The technology is maybe 50%, 70% familiar already, depending on what you're using. So you're just turning on extra features for some people, and it's not a big leap. And we're turning it up to 11. So this is probably only really one for the remote people who are using remote access, and for that I mean remote access. I go into my machine, I click a wee icon, I click connect. I'm on the company network, but I'm at home. That sort of remote access. Zero Trust is kind of moving away from a need for that. It isn't Zero Trust that you just connect and you can get onto the whole company network. Even being a bit granular about things, you're wanting to Zero Trust your apps. Think about a situation where everything is SaaS-based, everything is MFA'd, you don't really need to access anything on the company network at all in that way that you would do it with a remote access VPN. And that's a thinking exercise of, how would I get rid of my remote access VPN? Also the concept of no trust, this is a me thing, all right? This is not part of Zero Trust, but this is just something that could be a time saver. If you can operate just the same in the office as you can from a coffee shop or from your home broadband without using a remote access VPN, those networks in your office, on your campus, why would you bother giving someone granular access when you could just isolate every client from each other, perform observability on the network always, because you want to just check, have a perimeter security device. But other than that, it's effectively your campus becomes a guest network almost. Could be something that gives you a lot of security, but a lot less effort than I need a full-blown policy engine controlling everything and I have to fingerprint and scan all my endpoints. I'm going to kind of summarize up with a few bits of advice to kind of get you started. Strategy first. Sorry, had to reiterate it. If you don't know where you're going, you won't get there. Highest risks. Start with the highest risks. That's the biggest wins. That's the stuff that keeps you up at night. Get Zero Trust implemented. You will, of course, have to first establish your trusted infrastructure. And by that, I mean the brain. You need to get your brain in place. You need to decide as part of your strategy what solution or solutions you're going for and get them deployed first. Visibility is really, really important. If you can't verify you've done it right, where's the audit trail? If you can't verify that devices are behaving normally, you're just waiting till there's a lapse and something starts moving about the network. Quick win, if you already have some form of central control, that is a good jumping off point to start deploying some Zero Trust mechanisms. Could be agents, could be some sort of MDM. It might be that the product you're already using has some mechanisms that dovetail into other products. So maybe start looking there and see what you've got. try and establish your boundaries. If you really don't have the time, get the boundaries in place, the points of enforcement, and then work on drilling down the zero trust on that later. It's better to have something than a lovely policy that you can't implement because it's too complicated or you can't get the time to do it. So just start, get moving. Think about removing your remote access VPN. What would you have to do that? It's a good thought exercise to start thinking in zero trust terms. And lastly, establish your network baseline. So if you're looking at the traffic, you're seeing what happens on a normal day. That intelligence can be later used to spot anomalies. Addressing the elephant in the room though, what happens if you're already riddled with malware? That's part of your network baseline. So visibility is probably not going to help you there, but zero trust isn't visibility, it's depth, defense in depth. So your baseline might be all out of whack, but the other tools within zero trust are going to highlight where things are going on. If there are actually active threats, your IPS, your IPS probably, anti-malware detection, the various other security mechanisms will start picking up on these and highlighting them. And where you've brought them all together as part of a unified security solution, you can hopefully return your network baseline back to normal again. And with that, I want to move on to any questions that might have arisen from this.
Brian, are there any questions in the room? Oh, we've got one right at the back. I think
Right.
there might be a microphone coming towards people if you do have a question.
Hi there. Thanks for that. You mentioned about removing the VPN, but that's one I'm struggling with in terms of defense in depth, because would it not be better to have a VPN and still have your applications behind it as zero trust? Or is it just that you meant remove the VPN as like your kind of defense and then everything else in that is open? Would it not be better to have both?
So yeah, I mean, it was more just a case of the VPN could be a source of ingress that's, typically unconstrained. I don't see a lot of people putting a lot of access control on their VPN. So it was more a case of when people have VPNs, that's a big comfy blanket that they can fall back on, and so the security falls lax everywhere else. Now it might be another way to think about it is if you've got internal. Thank you very much. If you've got internal apps, ideally the traffic to and from should be encrypted. So if you're VPNing that as well, you're double encrypting. I mean, it's good, but essentially the VPN I think is a bit of a crutch. There's lots of mechanisms in zero trust that are all about taking even insecure apps, presenting them publicly, and locking them right down. For example, I won't go into vendor stuff, try and keep it agnostic. You'll all be familiar with it. You can present an application onto the internet and people can just access it directly. But if you're, say, using an endpoint agent, there could be cloud intelligence that knows that endpoint is coming from this specific public IP address, and what it does is it creates an even more granular new rule that says to access this server, allow that public IP address. I'll put a wee question out to anyone who spots the flaw there, but anyway, allow that public IP address to access this service only, and obviously via TLS encrypted or better mechanisms. Whereas remote access is, you spend so much time making it granular enough for all your different users, or if you've got a big enough company, it's the same profile for everyone. Everyone can just get on the network willy-nilly. So I don't know, I see having remote access as a crutch and a barrier to progress. Does that answer the question, or do you want me to kind of go into a bit more detail?
Any other questions in the room?
Yeah, does zero trust kind of complement layered networks, or does it work against it and you don't need to worry about layered networks so much in the future?
So I'll give you an example, actually, that I'm happy to ask the question again if I don't answer it with this, but I've seen a presentation essentially talking about a company a mystical company, but they proved the tech, where they took the entire company and put everything on 10.0/8. They put everything on there. Guests, BYOD, servers, switches, management, everything. And they went, it's secure. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, the network stops the traffic going left, right, east, west as appropriate. It was kind of zero trusty-esque because it was a while back. And it was a case of, right, they didn't have a firewall at the edge either. Security was in the network. It was all baked in. So even though everything was on the same subnet, the guest Android device couldn't talk to the mission critical application server that was an internal only, because and you're probably going, that seems like an awfully large broadcast domain. Well, there was a fabric involved, so broadcast was constrained down, it was minimized. So even from a network engineering perspective, and interesting thought experiment, but you might still want to keep your different subnets just to help you think. But the one thing you will notice that I didn't mention IP address in my sheet talking about things that you would use as a factor. IP address is something the clients are given. It's not, in Zero Trust, you don't make decisions based on internal IP addressing. You might make it on externals, with like geo-blocking, I want to stop certain countries connecting to my web apps or only allow it from this country. But internal IP addresses really don't have much relevance in Zero Trust because you're looking at the endpoints, you're looking at the apps, you're looking at the behaviors. What's an IP address? The enforcement might be by IP address, as in the network blocks a certain IP or a certain MAC address from doing things. But you don't make decisions based on the IP address. So feel free to ask the question again and I'll answer it a different way. Do you think?
I think what you indicated was that keep the layers of work.
If you've already got it, keep it.
Yeah.
Why change? That's a load of extra work.
Maybe a project man who went in with just one.
Yes, no. I'm not advocating that you bring everything together on the same network. But if you were in a position, for example, OT networks, it's quite common where they need to get it rolled out, quickly. Security wasn't an issue when it was deployed, and so it all goes onto the same subnet. All the different networks, all the different machinery, and the different areas within the industrial network all go in the same subnet, and you need to secure that. And you need to secure that without changing IP addressing because it's kind of set and these applications are very resistant to change and reconfiguration. So you can bring security to that without having to re-architect your IP. But at the same time, no harm in having that or keeping your IP addressing as it is. Implementing Zero Trust is probably a big enough job without having to do all that as well. Because it's all brownfield, I imagine. Can't imagine everyone's doing Zero Trust in a greenfield that commonly these days. Any last Oh, go for it.
How do we implement the VPN removal for global market? For example, I'm operating in a multi-markets like Japan, EMEA, US.
Sorry, I was quite quiet with the microphone.
Sorry. How do we implement this concept in a global market business model?
Across kind of multinational, yeah?
Yeah.
Depends exactly on your use case and your topology, I imagine, but the compliance probably vary country to country, and I definitely don't have an answer to that. And it will depend on the solution you pick as well, because this is why I try to keep it as kind of open as and not specific to examples or vendors. You need to follow the steps. Get your brain in place, and it might be that if you are operating in multiple theaters, that you have to have multiple brains, and that's where you might need additional tooling like security intelligence feeds between them, or some form of conduits, some sort of security intelligence aggregator that shares that information between them and allows comms, because I assume that you probably want your users to kind of be able to go anywhere and do anything, regardless of whether they're in Europe, Middle East, or the US, or wherever. And then there's tricky places where they put all sorts of restrictions on what you can use. It does get very tricky, and this is where your vendor selection process can. It's an important thing to think about at strategy level because, well, and planning. Do you opt for a homogeneous vendor environment and leverage the better security integrations between all those products? Or do you go for a best of breed approach or best of budget approach and hope you can make the integrations work? Because right now we are at the point where Zero Trust is still a bit proprietary within the vendor ecosystems, and you might find that one product will work with another, but there is so much more you can leverage by going with a single vendor for your entire solutions. Vendor lock-in is a problem, and as Zero Trust evolves, we're going to see more modularity and the ability to swap components out a bit more freely. There's definitely some existing standards in the space, but not many. The hope is there will be more standards to allow potentially even greater cost savings as well by being able to swap out the components for something more cost appropriate or something more suitable to your use case where the numbers work better. Does that answer your question, or do you want to finesse it a bit and maybe go into a bit more detail? Kind of, yeah. I'll take kind of, that's great. If you do want to chat to me more, I'll be at the barrier stand downstairs, or you can just get me after the session.
We've got time for one more question, I think.
Thank you. You mentioned observability a lot in terms of Zero Trust network architecture. How much granular do you think it needs to be? And the next one is probably, how do you compare observability with monitoring?
So monitoring I consider to be, is the thing performing and with normal parameters, CPU memory, something like that. Observability is, observability could be, I am looking at NetFlow, for example. I'm looking at traffic flows and looking for what's talking to what. Observability could be packet level. I could be looking at what traffic is going between these devices. NetFlow is going to show you anomalies. Packet level is going to show you potential indications of compromise. And to be honest, ideally you want both. Do you want me to go into a bit about the observability from the verification of the solution, or do you just want to kind of focus on those two? Again, going back to observability is looking at what's happening on the network, but also looking to make sure some form of kind of effectively unit testing. You know, I have implemented a policy that stops this talking to this. Can I verify that's working? Now, you could infer that from looking at the packets, but till you see a packet trying to do it and not make it, you can't know for sure. So, but there is also things that do, you've got a lot of encrypted traffic. So there's a few options in the space, keeping it agnostic. Some vendors have solutions that can look at encrypted traffic and without decrypting it, make assumptions with a reasonably good rate of success. Or you have to start decrypting. In areas you will potentially be decrypting, but you can't decrypt everything. So this is where the NetFlow, you're looking at devices talking to devices, accessing applications. That's never happened before. And that observability gets fed into an engine, and that engine makes sense of the data and tells you if it's something to worry about or something not to worry about. But it's really trust but verify. Well, you can't have trust but verify. It's zero trust. Zero trust but verify, and double check that and make sure the endpoints are who they say they are. And never let up. It is security on steroids for the network. But the tooling is now better, so we can actually do what we set out to do years ago with things like NAC and least privilege. We always talk about the least privilege, but whenever someone does it, it's very easy to go, well, hang on a sec, you've not really drilled it down as possible as much as you can. Well, Zero Trust is bringing that to us, bringing us closer to that panacea.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. I know Barrier have got a big stand downstairs in the exhibition hall, so I'm going to volunteer. Ryan's going to be down there, so if you've got any other questions, please go and visit. But if we could just show our appreciation for that session. Thank you.